VEDA Day 29. Good morning, Internet citizens. Bill Corley here. And today I'm going to do part one of a two-parter. And this is to address a question or comment that was posted a couple of days ago by Chris Behenna about how do you do dispute resolution and frankly maintain a lawful order in the absence of bands of armed men enforcing their particular view of law on the rest of society. So that's sort of the question at large. There's a large and rich scholarship on this issue, and I reviewed some of it before putting this together, but I have some of my own thoughts as well. The reason why this is going to be a two-parter is because I kind of have to address two sort of different issues regarding this. And it really has to do with the kinds of people that you interact with in your lives. I'm just going to make an assertion that, well, I guess there's three kinds. Let me be very bright-liney and very dogmatic and attempt to divide humanity in the United States, or adult humanity in the United States, into three general classes of people. Class A, or Class 1, or whatever you want to call it, are people who are going to do what they think is right, regardless of whether or not it benefits them personally. So when faced with a moral choice, they're going to do what their conscience or their moral compass tells them is the right thing to do. And if that ends up being disadvantageous to them, well, that's the price of being a moral person. I would say that's not a majority, that's not a plurality of the people, but there are people that are like that. The second class, which I think constitutes the vast and overwhelming majority of people, especially when you break it down and start talking topic by topic, would be the class of people that, when faced with an ethical choice where the result is neutral towards them, are generally going to do the right thing. But when faced with a choice between doing what's right and doing what is in the short term convenient for them, may choose to do the thing that's short term convenient for them unless they see that there's some kind of perceived consequence or the threat of some kind of perceived consequence. And then there's the third class of people who, by and large, are only going to do the right thing, if at all, if really it is beneficially neutral to them. In other cases, what they're going to make their choice based on is entirely the perceived short-term benefit to themselves. Now I know that's some bright lines being drawn where there really aren't bright lines in life, but I think with respect to any particular law, you can class folks into one of those three buckets. I'll give you an example. You know, there are folks that will come to a stoplight or stop sign, say, in the middle of a residential neighborhood, and even in the middle of the night or in broad daylight with visibility as far as the eye can see and no cars, will always come to a full and complete stop before signaling the way to proceed. Then there are those folks that will kind of roll up to it and look around, and they'll stop if there's another car coming or if they think there might be cops around or whatever. But if it looks safe and there's no worries, they'll probably just do a California rolling stop and go right on through. And then there's the third class of people who really don't give a damn and will pull right out in front of somebody without really checking adequately. They will only do things, not do illegal things or anti-traffic law things if it looks like they're going to be hit immediately by failing that, and otherwise they view those things as suggestions. Now, you know, that's an easy case, stop sign. There are more complex cases, and we all probably break down into one of those three buckets with respect to many of those things. So I'm going to talk about the first two cases today, and I'm going to talk about the third case tomorrow. The reason for saying that is that I believe that the overwhelming majority of people are generally inclined to do the ethically right thing most of the time, unless they really think that they can get a benefit for themselves without any consequence, in which case they might choose to do the unethical thing. Those kinds of people, plus the kinds of people who generally always do the right thing, I think can be dealt with, or are dealt with by us in our daily lives, different than the class of people who basically are outlaws, who have decided with respect to that law that they don't recognize its validity over them, and that any obedience in practice to it is a mere coincidence or happenstance and not something that was intentionally sought after. And I think one deals with those folks in a different way. So let me talk about the first two classes. I think there are two sort of general principles. And again, I want to be clear here. There's no way that you would successfully transition to a society of laws but no governments overnight by flicking some sort of magical switch whereby all the people and the institutions disappear. So this idea that, oh, well, in the absence of government there would be chaos, and what you're talking about would never just sort of spontaneously emerge from that chaos, or would do so only after an interminable period of misery and suffering, well, that's not really what I'm talking about. What I'm really talking about is, okay, even though we sort of want to get rid of these bands of armed thugs as soon as possible, we recognize that this is not really going to happen overnight. It's going to be a gradual transition. And so what I'm trying to describe is, after this transition has taken place, how might it actually function? It's kind of hard to predict future social arrangements. And the issue of how the transition actually works is itself worthy of another conversation. So I think there are two points I'd like to make here, because I'm already going long and I haven't even gotten into the meat of the argument. The first is, I think, something I alluded to before. I think that in the absence of a universal set of laws enforced by bands of armed men, that the need for laws still exists, but I think law becomes personal. In other words, each person describes the set of laws that they're personally willing to be held accountable for. Okay, what things are they willing to say, if I break these laws, I'm willing to subject myself to some kind of sanction, whether that be an economic sanction or some other kind of sanction. And I think anyone in the first two classes would be happy to list off those things that they'd be willing to receive sanctions for, because they're the things that they just don't ever see themselves doing. And, things like murder and rape and assault, armed robbery, battery, that kind of thing. Theft, embezzlement, etc., etc. And you might say, well, if there's 300 million people, or let's just say 200 million adults, then how on earth could we manage to negotiate if there were 200 million sets of these sort of personal law codes? Well, I don't think that that's how things would evolve over time. I think that by and large, there is a core of laws that everybody, or most everybody in the first two classes of people could agree to be bound by. And those necessarily wouldn't be laws like what days can you buy alcohol and what days can you not buy alcohol, or well, I guess we could list all sorts of classes that probably wouldn't fall into that, things that are sort of arbitrary and etc. So I think that pretty quickly you would find that people would sign on or sign up for the agreement to be bound to a set of laws that other people have signed up for. And so you could imagine that, the devout Muslims, they might say we follow Sharia, or at least say Sunni Sharia or Shiite Sharia, and the some Catholics might say we follow, the law, the priest's law, or whatever. There might be other people that like the fundaments of a particular state constitution, and there's still others that will think deeply about this and will hire lawyers to draft up a statement of the laws that they're willing to abide by. But I think in the interests of everybody getting along, what I expect is that generally speaking, this set of laws will be very small compared to the mass of statute law on the books today. Statute law is not really derived from Roman statute law, but there's really two thoughts about law, that law is either written down by people in charge, or it's discovered from a set of basic principles about how human beings ought to get along. And I think that our society has become both more litigious and, frankly, less orderly and lawful as statute law or you could say it's fiat law, or law by decree, has replaced common law. In other words, the discovery by experienced jurors of law in the context of what's actually going on. So, final point on today then, if we say that individual people then, in such a circumstance, would declare what set of principles and laws that they're going to be bound by, then, well, okay, how's that going to be enforced or even adjudicated? And here's where I see a vast expansion of the system of private arbitration that already exists in the United States. The court cases are clogged, and so most disputes that people have that are serious disputes that aren't over criminal matters but over civil matters are handled by arbitration, because otherwise you're waiting years and years and years to have your date heard in court. So I see an expansion of what arbitrators would deal with, and I see people, like I said in the first two sort of classes, people that aren't outlaws submitting their disputes to an arbitrator and having them resolved. And I think that it would be easy to do so generally because, if you're going to deal with somebody, then you're going to know what their code of ethics is. And the other side of this would be what I would call dispute or crime insurance. I think that just like we have insurance policies today to cover damage to our autos, I think we're going to have insurance policies to cover other kinds of damage from unlawful behavior. And that those insurance companies, some will cover you basically on the basis of what system of ethics you declare. And they'll end up having agreements with one another about how they deal with sort of cross-ethical boundaries. And so by and large, I think this may all sound complicated, but I think by and large it means that as you go through, if you're in one of the first two classes of people, as you go through your day, you really don't have a whole lot of contact with the law because you're basically doing what's right most of the time. And since there aren't all these statute laws that sort of prescribe every possible conceivable thing that you might do, then most conduct, doesn't come under the scrutiny of your law code. I mean, there's a big difference between actions or activities that actually hurt someone or their property or whatever, or deprive them of something, and things that just offend other people. And we've taken a lot of things that just offend people and we've codified them into law today. Or we've taken one group of people's preferences for how property rights ought to be realized, and we've codified that into law. And I guess what I'm saying is that let those people codify those principles into the laws that they agree to be bound by, and let these ethical principles, these law codes, duel it out, if you will, in full public view, and let's see which one of them ends up creating more successful law-abiding citizens in the long term. So insurance companies, arbitration agencies, and declaration of personal ethical systems that I think over time will yield to a sort of a two-tier system, one part of it in which regards your personal conduct and another part of it which regards your conduct towards other people. And I think that second part is going to converge, or would converge over time, to pretty much a common standard, because in interacting with other people, I think there's a minimal set of laws that we really require to get along with one another. And adding more to that isn't helpful. With respect to your own personal set of ethics and your own behavior, I think that's where we'll see a lot more variance, a lot more individual preferences exposed. So I think that's all I'm going to say about that part. I think the second part, or the second question, which is, well, what about that minority? Sure, but it's a large enough minority that you can't ignore it, of people who basically aren't going to do the right thing, whether they're the sort of people who are going to run a stoplight or are going to rob other people. So that's where I'll leave it for now, and I will see you tomorrow on what will be the final day of my VEDA experiment, and I will be announcing what happens after that as well. So that's it for me. Be kind to one another. Bye.